Hello, friends. Welcome to the Friday stream. Can you hear me? I ask this every time, and every time you can, so I should just go ahead and get into it, I guess. Welcome to the Friday stream. I'm your hostess, Lisa. If you are new here, welcome. On Fridays, we read and learn together, and we tend to focus on women centered topics. And today is International Women's Day, and I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I do think that it's a little belittling or something, or goofy to have, like, International Women's Day. We are over 50% of the population. Like, having, like, 1 day for women, it kind of feels like a professional sports team having Native Americans as their mascot. Like, it's that same vibe, in my opinion. Um, but, like, a few people have wished me a happy International Women's Day, and that's cool too. Like, I'll say happy day back to you, but I just think there's something, like, a little off about that. You know, we're gonna be talking about a really difficult topic today too, by the way, trigger warning. Someone told me to put a trigger warning on this. Um, and that is male violence. I'm not even gonna worry about censoring myself because this is a very unmonetizable topic, and not that I would anyways, but, um so, yeah, I just think, like, yeah, in light of it being International Women's Day, it's like we have to remind ourselves, or do we have to remind ourselves that women face, like, so much violence and men basically rape with impunity. Uh, Over 99 out of 100 rapists just completely get away with it without ever facing consequences. And I think the story we're going to read today is very bittersweet because it's about a man who really terrorized women, and they have to live with that for the rest of their life. But the sweet part is that he justice was served. He finally, after so many years of committing these crimes, was convicted. Um, Expired Milk says, Lisa's reminding me it's still cold up north. Meanwhile, I'm in Florida. Enjoy Florida. I have a beanie on. I dressed for the part because we're talking about climbing today, so I thought I would dress as a climber. But I also just went swimming. You can kind of see my goggle marks. So my hair is wet. And so I'm trying to kind of stay warm. Um, so Yes, what do I wanna start with? I have a few slides that I want to show y'all. I know probably most of the chat, you come from the feminist side of things rather than the climbing side of things, so I wanna give you guys of a little bit of background in the climbing community and stuff. Existential says it's frustrating that too often predators have to leave tons of victims in their wake before anything is actually done. Very true. Um, very, very true. Before we start with everything, I like to say, the way this works is we read an article together and I highlight your comments as we go. And I will put my own input into my own thoughts. We tend to look at things from a perspective of women's empowerment and liberation. So, yeah, I do think, it's like, I was thinking about this before. Every day should be a day to bring attention to women's issues because we are so far from done, you know, we're so far from done. In fact, we've been sliding backwards for many years now, and this is really cool, and this is how it should be. Um, Nick says it's a day to commemorate women's unions, etc. That's the origin. I do not congratulate women today. Its real meaning has been distorted by the normies, yes, and it's become very co-opted by like corporate consumer culture too. Like if you just Google International Women's Day cosmetics coupon. It's become about that. Like, that has nothing to do with the women's liberation. It's very bizarre. Enlightened Female says the lack of reporting and conviction for sexual crimes that males commit shows that so many men and women view women as property to be used. Society will always find a way to blame a woman. I think about it all the time. I think about it all the time. Um, Men get to have humanity in this world, and women are seen as resources, not humans. So we really do have to take every opportunity we can to assert ourselves as humans. Um, let's see, let's go full. Okay. So, as a response to this criminal, Charles Barrett, uh, a lot of people came out. It's very interesting. There are various climbing communities on the internet, and I've been poking around them. Some of them I'm a part of, and some of them I've just been looking at as a result of researching this topic. And so much of the discussion has been very like balanced and like with a lot of people coming to this guy's defense or saying like this can't be these women must be lying and stuff like that. John Krakauer, who some of you normies, and I say that in uh, the most endearing way. Um, he's a very famous writer of mountain literature. He wrote Into Thin Air, and he's really like a pillar of the climbing community. So for him to say this quote, I think, it's really, really good. We do have men standing up for the women in this case. So John Krakauer said, sexual assault is probably the only crime in which the victim is assumed to be lying. You should be much more concerned about the victim getting a fair trial, not Barrett. Rapists almost always escape accountability. So is that true? Rapists almost always escape accountability. Are there facts to back that up? Um, yes, we know that it's less than 1% of rapes lead to felony convictions. It's actually closer to about 0.6%, so 1 in 200, but that's like based on estimates. This was according to an analysis by the Washington Post. It's crazy. It's like men rape with impunity. They know they can do these crimes and almost always get away with it. What other crime is like that? Where you just know you can do it and you're never going to have to suffer any consequences. 89% of victims of sex crimes report distress, physical injury, PTSD, depression, anxiety, and drug abuse. So the victims have to live with the consequences. The rapists don't have to live with the consequences. And less than a third of rapes are reported to the police. And the reason for that is a lot of women feel ashamed and embarrassed. They feel like it was their fault. There's also the threat that the perpetrator will continue more violence against them or, retribution. And we're definitely going to see that in this story and this article today. That one of the reasons this guy got away with this for so long is because the women were so afraid. He had threatened to kill them. So they were so afraid that if they went to the cops or whatever, that there would, not only would nothing be done on the justice side of things, but he would, retaliate and hurt them worse or possibly kill them. There's also a fear that women won't be believed because we know that very often they aren't. There's also the feeling that nothing's going to happen anyways. The cops can't do anything. The justice system won't do anything because even and again, that's another thing we'll see in this story. This guy had so many plea deals. He was involved in the justice system for the majority of the time he was perpetrating these crimes, but it was like catch and release. They caught him, they let him go. And then some women, they just want to move on, they want to begin healing, and they don't want to prolong the suffering that if they went to the cops or, there was a trial or whatever, that it's just going to be add more layers to the trauma. So those are reasons women don't report to the police, and those may be good reasons. The unfortunate thing, and I don't want to victim blame at all, but because they don't report, and again, I think those are pretty legitimate reasons in a lot of cases, but it allows the perpetrators to go on and commit more crimes. Again, that's not victim blaming, that's just sort of a factual thing about that. So, have you guys heard of missing stair theory? Um, and I sent these slides to a friend, and he said, "That's a nice slide of Mount Rapemore." And I was like, "Oh my god, that's a crazy pun." But at the same time, there you go. Yeah, missing stair theory is the idea that in certain communities there are problem people. So they might not all be rapists, right? Sometimes it's just someone who like doesn't do their job at work, right? Uh, Someone who shirks their responsibilities, or they're just a pain to be around. They're, uh, just not a nice person or whatever. But it could be someone who is harming women, and what happens is people say, "Well, we'll tolerate that person. We know about it. We know they're a problem." And we'll try to just warn people as they come into the community that this person is a problem. So just as if you had a set of stairs and one was missing, you would warn people who came to your house, "Hey, you got to watch out for that stair." The problem is that once in a while someone's going to come through and they're not going to get the warning. So you know, they're going to be impacted by these repeat offenders. So, missing stare is a person within a social group or organization who many people know is untrustworthy or otherwise must be managed, but around whom the group chooses to work by discreetly warning newcomers of their behavior rather than address the person's behavior openly. People become used to the missing stare and quietly accepting of him. So I know probably a lot of the people in the chat are not climbers, and I want to speak a little bit about what makes the climbing community unique. Although we've seen this happen in lots of other communities and industries. The title of this stream is Charlie Barrett, the Harvey Weinstein of rock climbing, because a lot of people made the comparison to Harvey Weinstein. This was someone who everyone knew had was victimizing women, but nobody really did anything about it. Um, and the climbing community, though, does have some unique features to it. I mean, climbing is kind of a different world than any other world. So I want to talk about that for a few minutes. First of all, climbing has a culture of like inherent trust built in. And this is especially true. This might not be true of like gym bouldering, but if you go outside and you rope up with someone and you climb up a cliff and you are like hanging off the side of a cliff, you are trusting your partner with your life. And sometimes we meet people and within 20 minutes of meeting them, we're trusting them with our life as our belayer. It kind of can create really instant, like deep bonds between people. Again, because you've trusted them with your life. You're not going to play pickleball or something, you're not like going for a walk. It's an activity that's very dangerous inherently. And I wrote the sanctity of sharing a rope. There is like a sacredness to a climbing partnership. You literally trust your partner with your life. When someone says on belay, that means they're holding your rope. It's a very powerful statement for someone to say that to you. That says, whatever happens, I'm going to do my best to keep you safe, to keep you alive. It's very powerful, and I think because, if you trust someone with your life, you're going to trust their word. So if there's rumors that come up that maybe this person has abused women, well, but he held my rope and he kept me alive. So I believe his word. And I think that really could be at play here. Climbing, especially outdoor climbing, is very male dominated. Two-thirds of outdoor climbers are male. So it's a bro culture. Um, and, women are in the minority. So it's, it might, be a lot harder for women to speak up and feel they have a voice in that kind of environment. Climbing's also a culture of, for some people, escapism, coping with, difficult stuff in your life, mental health issues. Climbing is a moving meditation. It's a very mindful activity, and it is one of those things where you can really forget about the rest of of your problems in life, but it also kind of draws people who who have a lot of issues and are looking for that kind of escapist activity where they can forget about everything else and just focus on one thing. It can be very healthy to do that, but it can also be a way to cope that's kind of unhealthy. And finally, climbing's very anti-authority, anti-establishment. Um, this famous quote that climbers are the conquistadors of the useless. Like, this is something that is outside of normal society. I mean, a lot of people would look at climbers and be like, that's crazy. Why would you ever do that? Like, why would you go up on a cliff for no reason? Um, and this picture I have here is a famous skunks climber, Dick Williams, climbing in the nude. That is a tradition there. So, climbers are really different. And there might be an idea that when it comes to like law enforcement, that that's part of society, but climbing is like its own world where those kinds of rules don't apply. So I don't know if any or all of these things will be at play in this article, but we're going to take a look at that now. Existential says, I find Melanie Hamlet highly annoying, but she talks a lot about how extreme sports attract a certain type of men who are avoidant and danger seeking. So that's I think it's really true. And it can be very exhilarating to participate in these kinds of sports. And I think there's a lot of positives to it, but it definitely attracts a certain kind of man. And I think that when I first read the original article, which I linked in a community post, and I'll throw a link after the stream in the thing down below. So there was an original article for this story. It was in Climbing slash Outside magazine. And I read that story. It's too long to read on stream. It's like 11,000 words. The one we're reading today is pretty long too, but not quite that long. Um, I when I first read it, I was very disturbed. I read it at night and I had trouble going to sleep because I found the details very disturbing. I found it just kind of in my own brain opened up a can of worms of me thinking back, because 'cause I've had, like, 65 climbing partners or something like that, mostly men. I've only had a few female climbing partners. And when I think back, there were a lot of weirdos in that, uh, group of people. So Yeah, I did a lot of reflecting after I heard about this story and read about it, about my own experiences. Thankfully, I never encountered anyone quite this insane. Um, but I definitely encountered predatory men for sure. And just men, just weirdos, like just straight up weirdos. So let's go ahead and start to take a look at this article. Um, Hold on one second. I will be right back. Muted. Okay. Enlightened Female says, I'm curious about your experience and how safe you felt with male versus female climbing partners. Um, sorry, I just had to run downstairs for a second. Um, I I was climbing like pre Me Too era, and I feel really differently about men now versus then. And I think I really like took it for granted that men are like safe most of the time. And maybe they are safe most of the time, but it's that small percentage of time that that gets ya. Anyways, let's start in on the article. As we go, we can talk about our thoughts. Again, feel free to share as we go. And also, like, I love to hear from lurkers. So, anybody out there who's just a little timid to talk, feel free to speak up. This is a very like safe space to express yourself. And let's get into it. Okay, so I abbreviated the title for the sake of the thumbnail, but the title is Santa Rosa Climbing Community Reels after one of its own, Charles Barrett, is exposed as a sexual predator. Charles Barrett, recently convicted in federal court of aggravated sexual assault, is now described by former friends as a monster. Um, and I think another thing we can look at is we can look at the lens of this article, or we can look at this article and writing through the lens of how we talk about uh, sexual predators and how we write about them. And I think it's very important to be critical in all cases of this kind of writing. All right. Charles Barrett is 39 years old and very much alive, but people in Sonoma County's rock climbing community now tend to speak of him in the past tense of the Charlie Barrett they once knew or thought they knew. That person, the version of Barrett that people formerly believed in, has been obliterated by recent events. On January 31st, OutsideOnline.com published an 11,000 word expose on the Santa Rosa native, outing him as a serial sexual predator with a shocking history of violence, harassment, and intimidation. On February 13th, Barrett was found guilty by a federal jury in Sacramento of repeatedly raping a woman in August 2016 at Yosemite National Park, where he lived and worked at the time. Barrett, 39, had been charged with 2 counts of aggravated sexual abuse and 1 count of abusive sexual contact by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of California. The jury found him guilty on all counts. So pretty remarkable given that we know most men escape ever, conviction or having to, like, ever answer for their crimes, but it's good. It's good that, it's bad that he did the crimes. Obviously, a lot of women suffered, but it's good justice is served. Maybe this could be an example, within the climbing community or other communities, an example to men that you can't always get away with it, an example to women that sometimes you can get justice and that it might be worth coming forward. During the trial, 3 other women, including one from Sonoma County, testified that Barrett had also sexually assaulted them. Because those assaults occurred outside federal jurisdiction, they were not charged in the case, but the judge did allow the testimony of those victims, ruling it relevant to the case. So that's kind of really interesting because usually they don't allow, other crimes to be brought up in in a in a trial like that. So that's interesting. I'm kind of interested in, like, the legal aspect of that. According to a report by Christy McGee, a special agent in the National Park Service Investigative Services Branch, Barrett initiated the first assault of his then 19-year-old victim. So in 2016, he would have been 30, 31, and his victim was 19 years old. So that's already, like, totally, like, messed up. Um, he initiated the assault by aggressively kissing her, not slowing down or stopping when she asked, ripping out her nose ring when she tried to create distance, and continuing even though she straightened out her arm and pressed it against his chest and told him to stop. Barrett then strangled her to the point where she didn't know if she lost consciousness or not. Then sexually assaulted her, according to the report. So that's about as brutal as it gets. He strangled her. They say that men who strangle women, that's a strong precursor to murdering women. So if you're strangled in the course of abuse versus other kinds of assault, I guess, that's strongly correlated with then going on to be murdered, if that makes sense. He assaulted the victim twice more over the next 2 days, during which time she stayed with him because she was in a frozen state and feared for her life, the woman told investigators. So I think that's something that's generally very hard for people to understand, why a woman would stay with a man who had raped her, who had strangled her. Um, but, you know, victimizing a woman does stuff to her brain. Like, it can be very impossible to think straight when you are in a state of that deep kind of trauma. So yeah, it doesn't make logical sense why a woman would spend the next few days with a man who is repeatedly raping her, but trauma does weird things to brains. Like, the brain is not going to be acting logically at all when it's in that state. This defendant used his renown and physical presence as a rock climber to lure and intimidate victims who were part of the rock climbing community. U.S. Attorney Philip Talbert said in a statement his violent sexual assaults were devastating to the victims, whom he later threatened in the lead up to trial. So these threats. I think, like, you cannot underestimate how damaging that is. Threatening women, this is a guy who really could kill someone. I mean, we know it happens all the time, and yeah. Existential says Reddit is always arguing that opposing age gaps is infantilizing women. Oh, yes, you see that all the time. But women rightfully point out how predators target very young women for this exact reason. If you're 19 and some 30 something man comes sniffing around, be wary. I mean, yeah, like, I think to a 19-year-old, you're like, wow, this older guy thinks I'm special. Like that, it puts you in a really vulnerable state where, you don't know better. I think I agree that women probably up to about 25 to 30, somewhere in there, that's when your prefrontal cortex is fully developed. It doesn't develop in a woman, you know, any quicker than it fully develops in a man. And, I had a friend who actually a climbing partner. She was like 21 and she was dating a guy at the gym who was in his late 30s and he was so cruel and awful to her. And, I think it was consensual, but she was so young, she was so vulnerable. This guy was so manipulative and like purely evil to her. And what would you say? Like, she was 21. She was 21. She could make her own decisions. She could consent to stuff. She could leave. I don't know. I think women at that age are very vulnerable. Enlightened female says, as much as I avoid men, I can 100% understand why she stayed with him. He committed an action, strangling, that often leads to murder. It very well could have been life or death. He may have been threatening her that if she left or told anybody that he was going to kill her. And after someone has strangled you till you're unconscious, you're gonna believe that. Irene says, "This is why I could never be a lawyer, imagining having to fight on the defense in this trial, defending someone like this guy from getting punished." Ugh, exactly. Rosa brings up a great point. Fight versus flight versus freeze versus fawn, the four most common main trauma responses, right? People think about fight and flight. Freeze sometimes comes in, but people very rarely talk about fawn. Fawning is like when you try to get you act like a little baby or something towards your abuser, and you act sweet towards them. That is a trauma response, and it's one that's very hard for people who haven't experienced it to understand that. Ballistic says, I'm 28 and I can't imagine being with a 21-year-old. The difference in mindset is just too big. I totally agree. Totally agree. I think, you know, like late 20, like 25 on is kind of my personal opinion. It's fair game. I think it's still weird when there are like massive age gaps, but after about 25, you finished up with adolescence, you're an adult, you're like in the world, and I trust the judgment of someone that age much more than say like a 21-year-old. Existential says society tries to dismiss the wisdom of older women by telling young women we're jealous and bitter when in reality we've been there and we know what's up. That's it. That's it. We've talked about this at length many times, but older women are definitely villainized, demonized, and it's because we know and we have the information to pass on to young women. But look at every Disney story. It's like a young woman and the villain is an older woman. Like, it's wild. It's wild. Dewey says, when I think how vulnerable women in their early 20s can be, it makes me sick to my stomach to think that 18-year-old girls can strip and do porn. And yeah, like, it's crazy the age of consent actually is 18. It should be much older. Like, again, your brain's not developed. I don't think 18-year-old boys should be going off to war either. Like, that's insane to me too. But they get them when they think, this is the other thing is kids that age, they do think they know everything and they do think they're invincible. And I know that because I've been that age. So, yeah, Megan says, I was a horrible pick me at 21. A lot of us here were. Don't feel bad. Don't feel bad about it. Existential. I was such an idiot at 21. Yeah, and I was talking about I started climbing when I was 26 and um and this is so way before Me Too. I started climbing in I think 2009. Um and yeah, at that time I just felt like men are safe, I don't yeah, you know before it became such like an aware before there became this awareness of the volume of crimes that men do and the volume of men doing them and the volume of female victims, I think I really just didn't have any idea. And even the things I experienced myself, like I've been sexually harassed, I'm a survivor. Like, um, I before Me Too, I really thought I was just an extreme outlier and that this stuff is not common. Even though I had experienced it, like, repeatedly in my own life, that should have tipped me off that this is really not that uncommon, like, yeah, but it didn't. I think I'm very happy for the Me Too conversation. I think it should have gone on a lot longer than it did. Me Too was kind of a flash in the pan, but, um, yeah. Enlightened female, we're so glad to have the young women here who get it. I think a lot more because of conversations like this, and I see it elsewhere on the internet. Women are, as long as we can talk and discuss this stuff, the ideas will come out, and more young women will come around to it. Oh, my younger self would definitely see me as like the old crazy crone who like doesn't want young girls to have any fun. But it's just not the case. It's like I know so many women feel this way. We had to earn this wisdom the hard way. We had to earn it the hard way, and we don't want other women to have to go through that. Okay, so let's see. I talked a little bit earlier about this writing when we see articles and we see writing about abusers. How do these articles get framed? How do the writers frame these stories? So, talented, troubled teen. So, it's interesting, like, they do start off with his crime, which is good. And now it's taking like a little rewind back in time to, where he came from. Barrett was 14 when he first showed up at Santa Rosa's Vertex Climbing Center. Sarah McKay, a former general manager, then co owner of the gym, remembers him as a funny, goofy, definitely charismatic, and blessed with natural climbing talent. So, in these articles about male villains, how much should we devote to positive qualities? He was funny, goofy, charismatic, and blessed with natural climbing talent. And he was a serial rapist and tortured women. So is that like even relevant? McKay sold her interest in Vertex in 2019 and moved with her husband to Nevada County, where she is now a nurse. She described the outside expose as shocking and devastating. While expressing some compassion for Barrett's demons, he's depicted in court documents and the outside stories as a binge drinker with mental health issues. McKay stated flatly, he is 100% responsible for his actions. He knew what he was doing. He made those choices. He's a monster, unfortunately. Um, Irene, I think it's a really good point. I think sometimes it can be useful to point out these males come across as charismatic so that it warns women of men with similar behaviors, right? Yeah, that is a very good point. So it's kind of like a two-sided thing, right? When you describe someone as funny, goofy, and charismatic, it's like, oh, you're kind of humanizing this man who did this horrible, awful thing. But at the same time, yeah, you have to let women know not every guy who does these kinds of crimes is going to come off as a creep initially, right? Like he might come off as a really cool guy. Like that's how these guys get in with women a lot of times. Enlightened female says, I don't know if it's just me, but I view those positive traits as red flags. Charismatic means manipulative. Found that one out the hard way. Goofy is hiding disgusting misogynistic views. So here is some members of the climbing community there in Santa Rosa where this guy originated from. Barrett hadn't even been climbing for a year and he was already catching up with us, recalled Chris Summit, a Santa Rosa based climbing instructor and guidebook author. His talent was insane. He would float, just dance up the rock. He was beautiful to watch. Within a few years, Barrett had dropped out of school, gravitating to destinations beyond Sonoma County, Bishop and Mammoth Lakes, Yosemite, and Joshua Tree National Parks, where he could pursue his passion outdoors full time. It was in those climbing meccas, far from his hometown, that Barrett first exhibited a pattern of criminal behavior that resulted in him serving 2 6-month prison sentences for separate offenses before he turned 26. Okay, so that's a fair amount of time to do. And, you know, we're talking about yellow flags and orange flags and red flags. This would definitely be crimson, red, because what we know about these kinds of criminals and predators is that they typically repeat their crimes. It's not usually a one-time type of thing where they learn their lesson, and that's why I really think men, especially if they are a repeat offender, just need to straight up be culled from society. There should be a 2 strikes and you're out rule. There's no reason, like, someone needs to commit a sex crime, go back out to society, commit another one, and then go back out into society again? What are you have to think about the victims. Every time one of these guys commits a crime, he's leaving behind a victim who has to live with that for the rest of her life. So, I truly believe this. They cannot be rehabilitated. I really agree. I guess that's like, I don't know, that's a controversial take, but the reason I think that or feel that way is there's a lot of evidence that shows that's the case. That, you know, there's just so many examples of that. Existential says they are 100% human, calling them monsters, others them. I call this pervert in the bushes syndrome, where people think a rapist has to be a specific type of man. That's a very good point. There are definitely men. Yes, I mean, some of you know this, that I got kicked off over it for calling rapists subhuman, I think. But they didn't kick me off because they thought that was dehumanizing men and we can't do that. Um but not for the reason like you just said, existential, that we actually need to recognize that these are human men. They're just like every other man. There's nothing really remarkable about them. They're not monsters. They're just men. They're just a normal man you'd come across. Um, It really wasn't that major news. This was sort of like local news in the climbing community and, in this local part of California, Yosemite area. Oh, abolishing prison, yeah, I think it's just a completely ridiculous idea. There are radical feminists who've come forward in favor of that, and it's insane. I don't know what that really has to do with feminism at all, although some women do believe that to be the case. So, someone who's committed such terrible crimes that they've had, we know a 6-month prison sentence for a sex crime is actually pretty significant, considering especially 199 out of 200 of these men never get any punishment at all. Um, that having to serve 2 6-month prison sentences is a very big deal. I don't think the bad stuff was there back when we used to hang out with him at Vertex, said Summit. Good last name for a climber, by the way. Something changed in him, he got really dark. Once he discovered the extent of Barrett's criminal behavior, Summit regretted ever giving him the benefit of the doubt, describing his ex friend's actions as disgusting and horrible. I think this article was an opportunity for some of these people to really go in on this guy, and it's good. I'm glad they did. By the time Gordon Cooley started climbing at Vertex in 2005, he now owns the gym. Barrett had already moved out of Sonoma County, but they often crossed paths through the years at Vertex or in Yosemite or Bishop. In addition to being a supremely talented climber, best known for pioneering some of the most daunting bouldering routes in California, Barrett had a pretty magnetic personality, Cooley recalled. Th- he just had that high energy persona that some people liked being around and some didn't. On the flip side, said Cooley, it became apparent to most people that he had a drinking problem. When he wasn't drinking, he was climbing at a world class level. When he was drinking, it was completely different. So, substance abuse problem, another red flag. Good point. Existential gamer. Once he discovered a predator man is not going to show this side to other men, it's not rocket science. Because Barrett tended to commit his worst transgressions far from his hometown, that behavior was compartmentalized to a degree, Cooley believes. As a result, many of Barrett's old Sonoma County acquaintances were stunned to discover the full extent of his predations. But that's interesting too. That they wrote full extent, like they knew he was somewhat of a creep, but they didn't realize how bad of a creep he was. It's unbelievably shocking to see that pattern of behavior had gone on for so long, said Cooley, with someone you thought you knew. Fear of retaliation. The investigation that resulted in Barrett's conviction was described in an affidavit by McGee, the lead detective, as the most complex and difficult sexual assault investigation I have ever participated in. Part of the reason the case was so complex and challenging, she added, was that many potential victims and witnesses expressed a fear of retaliation. So that is something that could really uh, keep a person quiet. This is a good point. Again, existential's gunning for that MVP of the chat award. Blaming drinking needs to stop. I get silly when I'm drunk. I don't assault people. It has nothing to do with the booze. I still think it's like a red flag though, right? If someone has like a substance abuse problem, I think we're on the same page though. And who could blame them? During a pre-trial jail call in October 2022, Barrett told a friend that something will happen to the victims, whether in the courts or not, court records reveal. Barrett continued the threat by mentioning that he had people in here, Fresno County Jail, which was a place with murderers. So continuing to threaten women even when he's already in jail. and it's just so evil. I mean, this is really to me, the physical crimes are one thing, but to perpetrate that putting that fear in people, that's a whole other level. I actually think that's an even worse level than the physical crimes is the psychic crimes. That's my personal opinion. You don't have to agree with me on that, but, yeah. I just got a reminder on my Garmin that I'm particularly stressed out right now, according to Garmin. So, yeah, I guess this is, like, kind of a stressful article. The file of that case, along with the outside story, cite numerous instances of Barrett stalking and harassing his victims physically and on social media. He used burner phones to make calls and send ominous texts and frequently violated protective orders. That's horrifying. That's horrifying. During a 14-year period in 2008, oh, sorry. I'm like reading the chat and reading this at the same time. During a 14-year period starting in 2008, author Annette McGivney found at least 9 criminal protective orders or restraining orders were obtained against Barrett by 4 women who said they had feared for their lives. Why is society we have determined that men like this get to live with freedom and not be called? N 4 women got 9 restraining orders against this guy. That's so insane. Like, he's just going around ruining people's lives, basically. If something is so bad that you have to get a restraining order against someone, like and he's just allowed to be out there doing this. Um, Mari says, "2008 gives me goosebumps. This MF has been doing this for way too long." Enlightened female, second rule of misogyny, only trust the word of men and only men. Women are not to be trusted. This is crazy. I've had personally, I said at the beginning that when I read the original article, I couldn't sleep and I felt so disturbed. And it's not only the people I encountered in climbing, but outside of climbing, I've had to go to the police twice over being threatened and, stalked and stuff like that, and it sucks. It's very disturbing. It it's, like, traumatizing. So, this story really resonates a lot, and yeah, Almond says sexual terrorism. Definitely. Psychic terrorism. I mean, that's what terrorism is, right? The terrorism is like the action, like the Boston Marathon bombing or something. A few people died, which is completely tragic. Many people were injured. But then think of the fear now everyone has to live with the next time they go to a sporting event or a crowded place or a parade or whatever. That's terrorism. It's terror. Terror is like the fear, the anticipation, the anxiety. Rosa says, I had to change my phone number, residence, delete all social media after having a nonstop stalker for 10 years. Can relate to that. McGee's reports recount several incidents of Barrett taking the phones of friends and acquaintances unbeknownst to them and using the devices to call, text, and threaten victims. So there's definitely like, this is really horrific and it seems like a mental health issue, but also, you're lucid. It's not like you're so mentally unhealthy. You're like lucid enough to do this kinds of crimes, right? This is crazy. Why is it that when people are put through a normal terrorist attack, people sympathize with their reactions, even though we know another experience like that is likely a 0% chance. And yet, like, with something like this, people won't sympathize with a stalking victim or something, even though the chance of something really bad happening is much higher than 0%. We just I think it's on that same thing of we don't see women as human, we don't see their experiences as, like, worthy of, you know, taking it seriously. Yes, but sexual battery, sexual assault, non-sexual assault, and harassment in all its forms is daily. It happens all the time, but if we're afraid of men, forget it. Forget it. You will never stop being ostracized if you say you're afraid of men. Even though the if you're afraid of a terrorist attack, totally normal. If you're afraid of dude, I was at the pool today and someone was just making a racket, like, outside the locker room, and I was like, "Oh my god, what if this turns into, like, an MS?" And I'm like, "Lisa, you're gonna be okay. Just finish taking your shower and getting dressed and everything." But I had that fear, because someone was just acting, like, totally insane in the lobby or whatever, and I could hear it while I was in the shower, and I'm like, but that's, like, a rational kind of fear. Uh, I don't know. Anyways, yeah, you get what I'm saying. It's literally mathematically logical for girls and women to be fearful. I really do avoid men as much as I can. I mean, yeah, misandry, right? Because, like, statistically, also, if you do a cost benefit analysis, what benefit would I have, say, from, like, dating men? Very little benefit, very high risk. Dewey says, "Y'all are reading each other's minds." Love it. Existential says, "It's not mental health. If it was, he would have this issue with everyone. It's control and entitlement. Men abuse women with precision and intent. It's not just him going crazy." This is such a great point and very well stated also that, yeah, like, someone who's really, like, schizophrenic or something, it's not gonna be so directed at certain victims. Like, this is so calculated and precise. It does seem like this guy is not right, but he's really it's so directed at certain people. It feels like not quite, a mental health issue entirely. So, okay. During a 14-year period, yes, so we just read that. McGee's reports recount several incidents of Barrett taking the phones of friends and acquaintances and using them to threaten victims. Barrett also threatened quite frequently to take his own life. Ugh. Who here? Just raise your hand if you've experienced this with a narcissist in your life, because this is like the probably one of the most common narcissist tactics when they feel they're being the attention is not fully on them or they're not getting what they want. Like, this is just super, super common. I would bet that most people, here who have dealt with the narcissist have dealt with this specifically. Yep, yep. As McGee noted, he had a pattern of harming people and then getting intoxicated to a dangerous level and threatening to kill himself. Threatening to commit suicide appears on the power and control wheel created by the Domestic Abuse Intervention Project in Duluth, Minnesota, as one of the ways abusers coerce and control victims. Because that's pretty powerful. I mean, men do KTS. So, you know, I think women have that sympathetic thing of, yeah, of course you don't want someone to do that, and you don't wanna be the reason someone did that, but Barrett's climbing talent was matched, it seemed, by a knack for eluding full accountability for his behavior. That's a good sentence. McKay found it staggering, she said, to see how many times he ended up with a plea deal or a restraining order that never got enforced. You know what just came to mind? Jeffrey Epstein. He had a very lenient deal. He was originally uh, picked up, and the government said, "Hey, here's a little slap on the wrist." And then what did he do after that? He committed many, many, many more crimes. I think also these plea deals and these little slap on the wrist, it tells the man, "Hey, just go ahead and do it because no one's ever gonna hold you accountable for it." It's like permission to do it. It's like saying like, "Oh, what you did really wasn't that bad, so just go ahead and do it." It really teaches, an individual abuser that they can just do this stuff with impunity. Barrett's attorney didn't respond to emailed requests for comment. Reached by phone, Barrett's mother said no comment. Restraining orders are kind of useless. Sure, this piece of paper will keep badly intentioned men away. I would never discourage a woman from getting one. Um, what they do allow is if a person violates it, it's like immediately they will be punished. Versus if you don't have um, a restraining order, there can be little that the police can do if someone is stalking and harassing you. So, you know, I Existential says, "Did Becker advise against restraining orders in certain situations?" Yeah, I mean, I think a big fear that women have why they don't get them is that they think this is gonna provoke the person more, or it's like, now my abuser's gonna see that as a challenge. But a lot of these guys are real cowards at heart, and it will work. It will work against some of them, so it's definitely situational. I would tend to agree with that. Emotional instability. The Yes, Irene, this is a great point too. Men try to flip the whole world upside down, saying that women are the emotional, moody, crazy ones. Um, there's that very dark joke that you'll hear men complain that their ex-girlfriend was crazy, but you'll never hear women complain that their ex-boyfriend was crazy because women with crazy ex-boyfriends are not here to complain. The Press Democrat is not naming the Sonoma County woman who testified in Barrett's trial about being sexually assaulted, harassed, and threatened by him. She did not respond to emails offering her the opportunity to comment. According to court documents, the woman met Barrett at a climbing gym in September 2016. They began a romantic relationship. She broke up with Barrett the following December because of the defendant's emotional instability. So they met at the gym, September, broke up in December because he was emotionally unstable. That's like a fair good amount of time. October, November, December, 3 months. Like, that doesn't sound like a lot, but you can get in a pretty deep relationship in 3 months or what feels like it. Um, After they split, he repeatedly called her, threatened to commit S word, and showed up at her home unannounced. On the evening of January 6, 2017, the woman drove to the Sebastopol Police Department fearing for her safety. Barrett was at her residence refusing to leave, she told police. That night, police responded to her address at least two additional times for similar conduct, including her report that Barrett was physically attempting to break into her house. Each time, Barrett eluded police, then returned when they were gone. Ugh, that's so scary. Um, Almond says a restraining order also depends on law enforcement to enforce it, though. And we can't forget the most cops are men. In my personal experience, I've had very good experiences with going to the cops. I was sexually assaulted. I went to the cops. They took it insanely seriously. I was like shocked actually how seriously they took it. I've gone multiple times for being stalked and threatened and stuff, and it was taken very, very seriously. I know not all women have that experience, but I'm pro police. This is not really like a shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, but I have that like hope that more women can have that experience with the police. And ultimately, they are like I know not everyone has good experiences with the police. I'm not trying to like um discount that at all, but that's what's standing between us and these predators. So we have to hope that some you know, that will, like, be there for us. It's like it's not perfect, and in a lot of cases, not great, but it's the best that we have, and it's kind of all that we have. So, you know, we should do more to with training and that kind of stuff to make the police more of a resource for women, but, it's like you shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. This may be true. Existential says, "From what I know about cops, the more the wrong kind of woman you look like, the less seriously they'll take you. Same with the court." Early the next morning, Sebastopol police responded to another call from the woman who reported that Barrett was back at her house trying to break in. This is your house where you're supposed to feel safe, and I can't imagine just being in this situation. While en route, an officer recounted in his report, dispatch advised me she could hear the woman yelling at Barrett to leave her alone. So very scary, very, very scary situation. Rosa says training the police to deal with autistic, mentally ill, or disabled women. That's a very good point. Um, I have a stream on my channel where I spoke to my best friend who happens to be a police officer about his experiences dealing with domestic violence and stuff and his training about that and everything. Um, and because there are cops really bring their own biases to it, and that's why I say cops are mostly male, right? They bring a male perspective to it. They bring a male bias. Maybe some female cops are male identified and they also bring a male perspective to it. So I think, I really do believe it's really important to have more female police officers who bring like a female perspective and can be advocates for victims. Upon contact with police, Barrett lied about his identity. Well, that's a crime right there. After using his ID to confirm it was him, police arrested him. He was charged with trespass, drive on private property, unauthorized entry of dwelling, and disorderly conduct, loitering on private property, facing a maximum of 6 months in jail. Barrett pleaded no contest to the trespassing charge and was sentenced to 24 months probation. Ugh! The two other charges were dropped. So all of this harassing this woman, and he just gets probation. So he's just out, right? He's just out. Can do this again. And he knows that he didn't have to, probation means that if he does it again in the next 24 months, that's it. He's going to prison. But like it's such a like not even a slap on the wrist. Brian Stable, assistant district attorney in Sonoma County DA office, disputed criticism that Barrett got off lightly. The case was brought during the tenure of then district attorney Jill Ravitch. The three charges, Stable explained, were brought in the alternative, meaning that they were alternate theories of the same conduct. Barrett's maximum exposure was 6 months in jail. The case was what it was, said Stable, a misdemeanor attempted trespassing. That's what all the evidence we had pointed to. That's what we charged, and that's what he pled to. Any allegations of other more serious conduct were never brought to us. The victim later shared far more serious allegations against Barrett with federal investigators. Those accounts, which appear in court documents, describe how, after the victim broke up with Barrett, he threatened to commit suicide, showed up at her house unannounced, and tried to get her fired from her job. Basically, went on a rampage trying to ruin her life. On an unspecified date, defendant showed up at victim's house with suicidal ideations, which, like, is that a crime? I don't know that that specifically is a crime. Um, but I guess if someone is threatening suicide, you should probably call 911 because that's a medical emergency at the very least. When they were alone, defendant pinned her to the ground with his full body weight, 6 feet, 165 pounds, so she was unable to move or breathe, then sexually assaulted her while she told him to get off of her. Bruh. The DA's office did a very thorough assessment of all evidence presented to us by all parties, and he pled to the appropriate charge, said Stable. So not only was he stalking her, but he also assaulted her. Regardless of his experience with the Sonoma County District Attorney's Office, Barrett has unquestionably been the beneficiary of favorable plea deals elsewhere, a pattern dating back nearly 20 years. I mean, I don't think it helps that our justice system is majority run by men. Who are the people handing out these plea deals? Are they male judges? Like, in December 2004, he was arrested in Yosemite National Park for offenses that included DUI. 20 years ago. During the drive to the Yosemite holding facility, he made threatening comments to one of the arresting officers, a woman. The threats included, "You're not safe, I'm going to hurt you, and she's going to die." Ugh. A few days later, he slashed the tires of a pickup truck belonging to another ranger who'd arrested him. Barrett was charged with 5 felonies, including witness retaliation, impeding, intimidating, and interfering with a federal officer, and vandalism. He faced the possibility of years in prison. In December 2006, however, Barrett was offered a plea deal from the U.S. attorney, which seemed generous given the severity of the alleged offenses, McGivney wrote in Outside. All of the felony counts would be dismissed if he pleaded guilty to a single misdemeanor vandalism charge? What the frick, dude? Like, this is how desperately the government doesn't wanna, like, go to trial on stuff. Ugh. Instead of spending years behind bars, Barrett was sentenced to 6 months and banned from Yosemite for 3 years. Woman knocked unconscious. The Outside story begins with a chilling account of Barrett punching his then girlfriend in the head and knocking her unconscious at her cabin near the Truckee River in 2006. His victim on that occasion, Bonnie Headland, did not press charges. Okay, not again, no victim blaming. We know we talked about there's a lot of reasons why women don't press charges. But and the women who did, like, nothing even happened anyways, right? Till way later. Rather, McGivney writes, she and her friends took a path that domestic violence experts say is a common response to a first encounter with an abuser. They gave Barrett the benefit of the doubt and showed him compassion. That was my reaction to this story initially too. This man did so much. I believe it, but it's unbelievable. Wow, everything he's already done is disgusting, but this is the law so dumb to not see he didn't care to transgress against a police officer? Yeah, crazy. Ah, enlightened female says justice system will do everything possible to avoid holding a man accountable. But in October 2008, Barrett assaulted her again. So he hit her so hard in the head. This is all in the other article that she lost consciousness. And I think in the other article they describe it in more detail, but he hit her and then he ran out into traffic. And when she regained consciousness, she had to run out and like chase after him and be like, "Oh my god, this guy's in a crisis," or whatever. And he was threatening to kill himself and stuff. And even though he had assaulted her so badly, she made it like he was actually the victim because he was going through some kind of mental health crisis. And her friend group or whatever thought, "Oh, you know, we need to like take care of this guy or something." So they showed him compassion. But then guess what? Like a year and a half later, did it again. This time, he assaulted her in front of witnesses at a campsite west of Bishop. After first hitting her dog, Barrett argued with, then punched Headland repeatedly in the head. In 2009, he pleaded guilty to battery on a cohabitant with traumatic injury, a felony punishable in California by 2 to 4 years in state prison. Again, Barrett negotiated a favorable plea deal and was sentenced to 6 months in prison and 5 years probation. If a person is out on probation and they murder you, like the probation didn't really do anything. Like you're still dead one way or the other. I don't know. Like it's not like probation really it's like we were talking about restraining orders, like, does it really help that much? By this time, recalled Sarah McKay, ex-owner of Vertex, Barrett was so far out of the community that members of the Sonoma County climbing tribe lost track of him for long periods of time. He'd blow into town for a week or two and then be gone for 10 months or 2 years. Another thing about the climbing community that I didn't mention earlier is it's very, like, tight-knit, especially as you get to climbing harder and harder, like, the climbing community gets more and more tight-knit, and it's the same people everywhere too because climbing's very, like people travel a lot, and, like, I've been in Las Vegas and run into people I knew, like, I've been in Colorado and run into people I knew, because just it's not a it's a small world, but, um, yeah, some and people come and go too for one reason or another. But she did hear about the second assault of Bonnie Headland. She knew he went to jail for that. "It was horrible and inexcusable," said McKay. "It changed the way I perceived Charlie for sure." Hits close to home. While he didn't know the specifics of the encounter, said Kevin Jorgensen, "I did know about Bonnie. It was horrific, and he went to jail as he should have." Jorgensen is co-owner of Session, a 23,000 square foot climbing, yoga, and fitness emporium in Santa Rosa. Session opened in 2022, 7 years after Jorgensen and Tommy Caldwell earned international acclaim for their pioneering free climb of the Dawn Wall in Yosemite Valley. Like Barrett, Jorgensen grew up in Santa Rosa. Like Barrett, he's 39 and got his start in the sport at Vertex, where both worked as route setters. And here's Kevin Jorgensen, and I read a lot of the discussions, and after the original article came out, and he sort of came off kind of bad in that article, and I feel like this article gave him the opportunity to redeem himself and restate some of the things that he said because he was sort of like, he was like, "This, like, it's whatever," you know. You have to read that original article to see what he said, but he did not come off very well. It was like, this is definitely a reputation recovery effort here. Their paths diverged, Jorgensen said. When I stayed in school and he didn't. He was climbing outside 7 days a week and I wasn't. In 2014, Jorgensen took to Facebook to plug one of Barrett's soon to be published guidebooks. That post, since removed, is mentioned by McGivney as an example of the social capital Barrett had accrued and used to insulate himself from accountability, and why this guy is being compared to Harvey Weinstein is he was a guidebook author. He was a very hard climber. He had videos of him climbing. He was a known guy. And people just assume that if you're like a hard climber and a guidebook author, that you're like you must be an upstanding person, which is just not the case. Jorgensen rejects the suggestion that he ever covered for Barrett. I knew about Bonnie and I knew Barrett went to jail for that, and I was like, good, he should go to jail, recalled Jorgensen. That was the first and only incident, physical or sexual, that I was aware of, he said, up until the outside story broke. In retrospect, do I regret not having a zero tolerance policy toward that friendship given what he did and what I was aware of? Yes, absolutely, he said. But I just wonder if, this is because it made him look bad rather than you know, does he really regret it or does he regret that he got caught looking bad? Did I know that Barrett's assault on Headland was just the tip of the iceberg and that was only going to get worse? No, of course not. We're all reeling with that, he said, speaking for the county's close knit climbing tribe. He extolled the courage of the victims who testified against Barrett. They possibly saved lives, Jorgensen said. Jorgensen noted that 1 in 6 American women has been the victim of an attempted or completed rape. His wife is among that statistic, he said. Not his story to tell, but okay. This is something we talk about, especially in the context of raising our son. This stuff hits super close to home. Jorgensen hasn't texted Barrett in 7.5 years, he said. I went back and looked. Their relationship really deteriorated over the years and became super toxic. It just got manipulative. He did this with a lot of people where he would only call when he was drunk and suicidal. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't a friendship. So I cut him off. Little did I know what was behind those calls, him facing accountability for the actions described in the story. So, oh, it's definitely higher than that, of course. Walls closing in. Accountability for Barrett was jump-started by the data scientists Charlie Ann Liu and Callie Renison and Katie Ives, former editor of The Alpinist magazine. In April 2018, a year after the hashtag MeToo movement first gained widespread attention, they launched a Safe Outside survey. Its purpose was to learn more about sexual harassment and assault in the rock climbing community. More than 5,300 climbers took the survey. 40% of female respondents reported 40% of female respondents reported experiencing some form of sexual harassment or sexual assault while engaged in a climbing activity. 54 respondents shared that they had been raped. Uh, I had an experience where I was climbing with a guy. We were on the ground. We were not actively, we were in between climbs. And I was like, yeah, I've had this shoulder issue for a while. A dude started just straight up like massaging me, like didn't even say, "Can I touch you?" or whatever. And like I was like, "Bleh," but then like, what do you do in that situation? I was like, "Oh, thanks." Like, what? I don't even know you. You're just like some person I'm climbing with like once. Don't touch me. Ugh. Like I was thinking about all the experiences I've had that were like that, just like slightly creepy and weird and off. Um this is not 54%, thankfully. It's 54 out of 5,300, so it's like 1%, but that's 1% of women who were raped while climbing? That's insane. What? Insane. Hey, Joan of Arc. Um, In follow up interviews with two women who reported having been sexually assaulted in California, Lou asked them who their perpetrator was. According to a court document, both replied after some hesitation that it was Charles Barrett. Lou put the two victims, KG and SF, in touch with one another. The women provided emotional support to each other and discussed their reporting options, said the document. So this is amazing, actually. This is amazing. These women did this survey, and then when 54 women said, "Hey, you know what? I've been raped while I was climbing," they said, "Who did it?" And they found out that this one guy was a systemic problem. Uh, and that's amazing. So this is real activism right here. Creating a survey and identifying a pattern from that. In uh In April 2020, KG reported Barrett's sexual assault to law enforcement. A federal investigation was launched. In August 2022 was a good day for Barrett until it wasn't. That Monday, he was a beneficiary of yet another favorable plea deal. Despite a lengthy Mammoth Lakes police report cataloging his years long pattern of stalking behavior and death threats aimed at SF, according to the outside piece, he was allowed to plead no contest to a single misdemeanor count of threatening with intent to terrorize. Yet again, he received no jail time. But as he left that Mono County courtroom, Barrett was arrested by federal authorities. He's been incarcerated ever since. Following a 7-day trial earlier this month, a jury unanimously found him guilty on all three counts. He's scheduled to be sentenced on May 21 and faces a maximum penalty of life in prison. Said coolly, "It's about time he was stopped." Call this guy. If dude, imagine if he gets like some. I wonder what the minimum penalty, or maybe there is no minimum penalty, but like, yeah, imagine he gets like a slap on the wrist again, you know? But he could get life, and we hope he does. What's slime? That's what slime looks like. What a creep. Okay, cool. That's that. So, what are our takeaways from this chat? Existential says we talked about charisma being a red flag, but also men who are pillars of the community or heroes in their local scenes are just as sus. Or like they could be, right? They could use that um they could use that status and prowess or whatever as a way to get away with stuff, because people will make generalizations. Oh, he's so good at this. He's a leader, whatever. Um So he can't have hurt women. They must be lying. I mean, that's the crazy thing with these things, when it's like so many women come forward and they're like, it's a conspiracy. All these women, they all came forward separately. They must be conspiring. Like it can't be this guy's like a serial rapist. It must be a conspiracy of women. We've seen it so many times. Um Trump. It must be all the women are lying, right? Enlightened female says he looks so pathetic in that picture mugshot. Men always feel so powerful abusing women until they get caught and the past starts resurfacing. It is satisfying to think about these men all in prison together hurting each other instead of hurting women. This is it. 92% of violent crimes are committed by men. The 8% that are committed by women, usually there is a man involved also. So it's very when has it ever been found true that women conspire to do this? Me about to go to work my closing shift with only males. I was actually Googling about this and I was like, is it is it women's this is not victim blaming. I feel like I've said stuff like this before. In fact, I'm sure I have. Is it women's responsibility to keep themselves safe? Kind of, right? Because we know that men are a problem. That's like a known thing. We can't trust men to act like in our interest or whatever. So you have to do what safeguards you can in your own life. You're not responsible if something happens to you, but you're the one who's going to suffer for it. I think a good analogy, I used to always think about this with running because I was always a road runner and I still am. If you run around cars, it's your responsibility to not get hit. And ultimately, if someone hits you, yeah, it's their fault. They did it. But you're going to die if you get hit by a car. So who really is responsible there? And it's the same thing with this stuff. You're the one who's gonna suffer the pain. So you have to keep yourself safe, and there's no perfect way to do it, you know? There's no perfect way to do it. You could do everything right and still be the victim of male violence. So it's not one's fault, but you can try to not put yourself in harm's way as much as you can, and that's really all we can do. Um, it only takes one bad man one time. There's no way to predict it. There was a case several years ago, maybe like 4 years ago or something, in the UK. I don't remember what city it was in, but women were getting stabbed with needles at a club and with like a date rape drug. So just someone was going around like stabbing them in the arm or back or whatever. And, then they were losing consciousness and stuff. This happened at the same, like, 1 or 2 clubs, like, over 100 times. So, there's no way women didn't know this was happening, and yet they were still going to party at these clubs, hoping it's not gonna happen to them. But can't you find some other activity to do or stay home or whatever? It sounds like a '90s urban legend. It was really true. It was really true, actually. Um, I remember writing about it at the time because I had this same sort of black pilled view of it, right? Again, it's not to victim blame the women that it happened to, but once that's a known thing, like, why would you put yourself in that situation? Find something else to do. You know that men are doing that. And I've been a victim. So, like, I'm not saying, did I do something wrong? Do I blame myself? No, not really. There's no doing wrong. Ultimately the blame falls on the person who did it, obviously, but you can do what you can, you know? And what sucks is, like, sometimes it does encroach on your freedom. That's why we always talk about this conversation as in terms of liberation rather than equality, um, because it encroaches on your freedom, like, think about there's been a couple incidences recently of women going trail running, which is something I love to do, in, like, populated areas too, and being murdered. And what if that's something that I love to do? I love trail running, so I can't do that anymore because then I'm putting myself in harm's way. Like, these are things I think about, you know? Existential says, use the car analogy too, and I hate how lib femmes think every protective measure is victim blaming. We live in reality, not our ideal world. Exactly. We have to protect ourselves. I think the car analogy is really good. It's like, um, if a car hits you, is it your fault? No, but you will die. So you know, if a car is coming, you got to make sure you step off the side of the road or whatever. If they're not paying attention to you, it's ultimately your job to not get hit by a car rather than, you know, in a perfect world, it would be the car's responsibility to not hit you, but the car is going to win every time. So, oh, and this is very true too. Us being critical of women choosing to do potentially harmful things comes from concern rather than blame. Absolutely. We're reacting to and trying to prevent misogyny, not perpetuating it. Exactly. Thank you so much. Thank you. Um, this is it. Exactly. Yeah, because some people would hear that and say, "Well, you're victim blaming." But that's not what it is. It's like, you know, this is also the idea we talk about, like, genetics versus socialization and, like, are men genetically programmed to rape, or, like, where does this come from? Is it something they learn or whatever? A lot of women wanna believe that this is something men learn, possibly from, like, their parents or whatever. And it's the kind of the same conversation where it's like, well, if you don't really address the cause of this, then you're never gonna, like, have a solution that's gonna actually work. We haven't found a solution that works because so many women are still getting raped and men are not, like, being held accountable for it. So we don't have a solution that works right now. So if we keep trying to do the same things that we've always done, which is like telling women, "You can go do whatever you want and you'll be safe," or it's not, you know, you have no responsibility in keeping yourself safe, then we're never gonna get to a place where women are actually safer. This is the pit bull debate all over again. Well, we haven't had that debate on the stream, but yeah, the idea that I wanna talk about that at some point. I don't know if I think Irene was the one who wanted to discuss that, but, I don't know if she's still here. Yeah, I think, yeah, we have to be realistic, think logically and be realistic. You know, what's a risky circumstance too? Risky circumstance could be sitting and watching TV at your house with your family member or whatever right there, because we know the people who are closest to us are, our biggest threat. So, there you go. Well, I think I'm gonna wrap up. Accepting reality and acting accordingly gives women power. It's the opposite of infantilizing, and I agree. I agree. If, you know, if the denial of reality was working, then we would see, like, trends towards women being safer and women having more rights, and we're seeing the opposite right now. Women have lost so much in the way of rights, uh, you know, in the last few years. It's really scary, and I'm glad to be doing these streams again. I hadn't been doing it for a few months, but there's so much stuff every day where I'm just like, it's it's actually urgent for us to be discussing all of this stuff. It's really, we're in a place right now where we're losing rights, like, every year significantly. We've backslid so much in the way that people perceive women and women's humanity. It's actually frightening. Actually, when I was putting together this stream, I was thinking, should I talk about Me Too? Because this article is like total Me Too article, right? Like, this is straight out of that era that has died. Me Too was like just such a short lived thing, and then thinking about what has happened since Me Too is, like, so disturbing actually, because I think there's 3 things that have really happened since Me Too. You have the rise of the Karen meme, and women who speak up are the problem, not the people who are doing terrible things, but it's the women who are speaking up are annoying or they're evil or whatever. So you have Karen. You have the way women like JK Rowling have been absolutely demonized for trying to, um, maintain women's safe spaces, and you have the rollback of our reproductive rights by the overturning Roe v. Wade. Those 3 things define our landscape, at least in America, since the Me Too era. Me Too was a really powerful moment for women. Um, and since then, it's like, can't have that. Can't have women talking to each other. Can't have women getting too much power. We have to stop that. That's scary. I was talking to Radical the other day. I wish I could pull up the conversation, but um, I was like, this is a really scary time to be alive as a woman. It's very sad to see like I have fewer rights than I did as a young woman. Women now they're growing up with fewer rights than I had. We know where we came from. We know how women, when we have other examples elsewhere in the world too, the Middle East specifically, and Asia and Africa, where women just like have no rights. And and then we have historical examples of that as well. And it's like terrifying to think that that's a world we could go back to. And we are slipping back there like daily. So it's very scary. Enlightened Female says we can open our own bank accounts, but we aren't respected and seen as people. Notice how most progress for women within society is tied to capitalism. It isn't a coincidence. So, yeah, I really think women are still so dehumanized. Like, it's totally insane and sad. Anyways, happy International Women's Day, everybody. So exciting to celebrate women. Yay. All right, I hope you guys have a great day. I am gonna run today. Probably not trail run, probably road run, I think. I don't know. It's a beautiful day here actually. I think it's like it's 53 degrees, very sunny. And oh, isn't this just the craziest thing? Beauty products are sold to us as empowering. It's crazy. It's like the bizarro Twilight Zone. Imagine selling a slave chains and saying, "Buy this. It will empower you. It will free you." Insane. Totally insane, and most people don't get it. It's crazy. I wish you all a great day and weekend. I will be back next Friday. There's actually another story in the climbing community that I would like to read, but maybe we won't do a climbing one right away. But there was a gal who was R-worded, by a man, but she was also groomed by him, and then she wrote a whole story about it, and came out with her story, and he also, I believe, went to prison. He was her coach, I think, and, she was a child, and he was assaulting her, so that's pretty gross, and there's a lot of this stuff going on in climbing, unfortunately, but a lot of accountability too, so that's good, that's hopeful. And there you go, that's it. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you all so much for participating in the chat, really loved reading what you had to say, appreciate that as always, and I will see you next time. Take care.